Welcome to The Memory Game, a podcast where I, Nathan Tuffin,
and I, Rob Beer, exchange voice notes as we carry out the important work of recording an emotional history of video games
for the betterment of future generations.
This week, Nath makes us meditate on the games that have relaxed us most.
Hey, all of this has been a dream. So you like Route 1, do you? Well then look out of your window, buddy, because I'm just about to empty a dump truck of Route 1 all over your driveway, and bits of it are probably going to get on your neighbour's driveway, and then it'll be awkward next time you ask them to cat sit for you while you're on holiday. So it felt like last week's question was a very powerful one in terms of accessing memories. And then in thinking about the games I found scary and watching YouTube videos of scary games that we've mentioned, I did end up finding myself feeling quite tense and in search of an antidote of sorts. I famously play too many video games that make me feel tense and uncomfortable. I think I often steer myself towards more violent and high-octane titles, and recognising that fact for the past few years, I've started to try and search for games that will relax me with little to no success. So my question this week is simply, what are the most relaxing games you have played? This is another one of those times when I know you'll have more answers to access than me, and I started thinking about what you would say before I actually considered my own answers to the question. Much like with what scares us, what relaxes us is individual to each person and probably more specific to each personality really, and there are some things which I think could probably be considered almost like universally scary, but that's not necessarily the case for what relaxes us. I think that's definitely going to come into play with both of our answers. And that's definitely something I've come to find with my pursuit of relaxing games. I don't actually know what relaxes me, certainly when it comes to entertainment and certainly video games. And there's an off chance that video games in general, maybe they're just not relaxing for me, and trying to smush the two together is pure folly, or maybe just taking the time to pursue something I enjoy doing, that's a form of relaxation or winding down, even if I'm not relaxed in the moment of playing a video game. As a window into some of my failed attempts at relaxation via gaming, as I've mentioned before, I spent a lot of time playing House Flipper because there's just no violence in that, and you just pootle around in a house, you slowly decorate it and put in furniture and stuff like that. But I think I got too absorbed by the challenge of doing up the house properly and then making a profit on its resale. And I got annoyed when you couldn't properly wallpaper like an awkward corner or place a bit of furniture central in the room so it lines up with the telly. And it's also, I think, more so than that, it's a first-person game where you play in complete isolation through day and night cycles, so it gets dark in the houses you're doing up, and they're quite sort of empty a lot of the time. And I know that logically there are no other entities or threats in the game, but I've played too many of the kinds of games we talked about last week, so I just have this kind of lingering mild unease about the prospect of something lurking just outside of my view. A little side note to self, I feel like I might have just invented a type of indie game where 90% of the game is just you performing menial tasks in a house or something, but then something horribly scares you out of the middle of nowhere, and it'd be the best jump scare ever because you've been lured into a false sense of security. And that's just one of many attempts I've made to play relaxing games. Last week, I literally went and searched the term relaxing in Steam, and I found that, of course, that's one of the tags that games can have in the Steam store. And one of the top games on the list was on sale for just a few pounds. It was called Outlanders, so I bought it. And it's this slowish-paced, kind of pretty, quaint city-building strategy game where you have these little communities of people on islands, and you forage for food, and you make buildings, you do farming. And, at the beginning, from what I could tell, there were no real threats or enemies to worry about. You're just kind of pootling along at your own pace. But then, about 3 hours in, I ended up in a situation where my little village of about 30 or so people had run out of food because I'd slightly mismanaged the farming situation on the island. And then, in spite of my desperate efforts, half of the population died of starvation. Is that relaxing? Was I relaxed? No. So my jaw was all set, my shoulders were tense, and I restarted the level with a kind of renewed sense of focus, and the people didn't starve the second time, but the price I paid was a complete experience devoid of any relaxation at all. So that's what we're working with here, and like everything else in my life, I'm looking to this podcast to fix what's broken. Hopefully having to really think about what games have relaxed me will help me find what I've been searching for, and then the happiness unlocked within. So the first game I thought about was Civilization 5 on the PC. It could have been any of the Civ games, really. I think I've probably played 4 and its expansions a bit more than 5. But I also think the series has gradually gotten simpler, and perhaps it's the simplicity that helps it to be more relaxing. So Civilization, or the game series, they're turn-based strategy games, and you start as a lone settler, you put down a city, and then through kind of expansion and building and research, you grow like one of the greatest civilizations from all of history. And there are lots of challenges, and you can get into wars and be attacked, and your cities can struggle and fail, and people can start to starve, just like in that other game. And it can be quite a complex game to get the hang of, especially in the first few attempts. But I do think the key for me here in terms of relaxation is the fact that it's a turn-based game. And what that means is that you have infinite amounts of time to fix every problem. And I've played the games for so long, I think I've worked out my exact right difficulty level. So it does end up kind of being a nice, slow jaunt that I feel like I can get lost in a little bit. And there's kind of almost monotonous administrative type tasks to be doing in the background all of the time, as well as just making decisions about how your civilization is going to progress. And there's this lovely music, that these great rich soundtracks they've always had, and the kind of smooth narrative tones of various well-renowned voice actors that teach you about ancient wonders and the history of civilization. The only one I can remember at the moment is Leonard Nimoy. I think he's on one of them, but I'll find out who the others are and include that in the research notes. The second game that I found relaxing was Stardew Valley, which I played on my phone. And I think at the time it would have been a really good contender for the first season episode we did on games we felt addicted to. And though most of the mobile games I've ever played and felt addicted to have been absolute trash, Stardew Valley is so well made. It doesn't fit the usual mould for a mobile game. It's just a great game in its own right. And for anyone who hasn't played it, it is a lovely kind of cartoony, top-down farm life simulator. I suppose you'd probably call it an RPG as well. And you gradually kind of build and expand this little farm that you inherit, and you grow crops and raise livestock. And I think the sort of combination of planning out a farm and the absolute lack of jeopardy in any way are what makes it relaxing. I think there's a cave you can go into and like fight blobs or something. There's like a little combat system, but it's so low stakes and vanilla that even I, Mr. Cowardly Custard, don't get creeped out by it. The third and final game I'm going to mention is Unpacking on the PC, which I think you actually may have recommended to me in the first place. It's just this lovely, quiet indie game where you unpack boxes for a young woman as she grows older and moves through her life. And she's moving from one home to another, and it's kind of really satisfying and pleasing to decide where this person's belongings will go and how their stuff is organised throughout their house. It starts with this person moving to a new home as a kid, and so there's like lots of teddy bears and toys and like colouring books and stuff to unpack, and then each next level is a new stage of her life. So like moving to college and moving in with her first partner, so there are kind of, kitchen and bathroom and living room items and stuff to unpack. And you just sort of grow up with this young woman, and then there's this lovely sort of story you can infer by the things you unpack trickling along in the background. And again, I think the key to the relaxation in this game, I mean, other than the fact it's very aesthetically pleasing and nice, might be, for me, the lack of any kind of time constraints or jeopardy, and just this kind of beautiful, bright imagery and plinky-plonky music. I have also played Unpacking quite a lot with my daughter, and she can now actually play it on her own and have played through it a couple of times. But when we first played it, watching her swing the mouse around and wedge things on shelves and cram things in cupboards in the least aesthetically pleasing way possible, that wasn't relaxing. But it was really lovely to see her get so much joy from the game, and just to bond over this sort of fun thing. So that's my 3 choices. I'll really look forward to your answers. I think I'd be very interested in any insights you have on, what it is you find relaxing about video games, and if it's something you actively seek out when you're making the choice of what game to play next. And also, maybe you can help me work out what my deal with relaxing games and this weird obsession I've developed with having to play a game that relaxes me. I think you know me as well as anyone. Why have I gotten fixated on this thing in particular? What am I playing at? Okay, buddy. All the love, hugs, well wishes, etc. Hit me up.
Hey, lingering mild unease. What a pleasant question. You'd hope that thinking about games that relax you would be a calm and meditative experience, but straight away I felt an anxiety to try and make these the right choices, or at least representative of my gaming experience. What I tried to do when I heard your initial question we start contemplating what relaxation is, or at least what it means to me. And so my first way of thinking about that was the idea of sort of decompressing. What are the games that I play when I feel stressed or anxious and I'm trying to decompress in some way? And the answers there are usually sports games. I guess because winning makes you feel good. And mostly in those games you win. And if you don't, you knock the difficulty settings down so that you're in that sweet spot of challenge. And particularly because I play them just against the computer rather than messing about online and that whole toxicity that comes with that. I think sports games are my answers. And over the years, I've played lots of Pro Evo and FIFA. In more recent years, Madden and, at the moment, NHL games. But the one I wanted to call out specifically was a phone game, and it's called Baseball Superstar 2013. I still download and recomplete every now and then. And the reason that I think it stands out to me is that it combines a simple sports game with the RPG mechanics, like Japanese RPG mechanics of sort of stat boosting and that kind of thing. And there's loads of different games that fit within that type of thing. I think Retro Bowl, which I also love, does a lot of this stuff. You start off and your characters aren't that good, and you play and then they get better, but then it gets harder, so you need to get better. Simple game loop. But Baseball Superstar 2013 is wrapped up like a Japanese like manga type thing. And what I love about it is that you play as an individual character rather than as a team, and you don't have to do the pitching if you don't want to, so you're just batting, and it just fast forwards through the games and lets you jump in at the points where you're playing, and there's no like bluster around it, so you're just really focused in on your individual task. And made in 2013, I think there's been attempts to improve them. There's been loads of different versions since. There's it must have been hundreds of baseball games since then, but I think that the basic touchscreen mechanics, they nailed it then, and the graphics don't need to be improved because it's stylistic rather than 3D graphics. It's anime manga style stuff, and that's all very pleasant and bright. And there's all these stupid little interactions with very heavily sexualized characters who I think the idea is that you can unlock endings where you'll become the girlfriends or something, and I don't really care. I just care about the baseball. I play it just like skipping all those bits, just trying to get back to the baseball mound. Pitchers are on the mound, I can't remember what the batters stand on, and just whack some baseballs, and it's really, really pleasing, and also fulfills the criteria of being something that a phone game that when you play it, it doesn't pause your podcast, which is the moment you open a game and it switches off your podcast, that's a no-go for me. You need to be able to play and listen. That's what I'm looking for in a phone game. And I guess I would have spent most of my time playing this on on trains to and from work, and just decompressing on the way home from work, or trying to relax my way into the day, because I don't greet the day with a smile. I'm sort of dragged out of bed reluctantly every time by the oppression of capitalism. But obviously post-COVID, I work from home a bunch more, so I play less of these games. Also try and reduce your phone time. I think it's notable, as I say, that this game was from 2013 because it was before they'd absolutely nailed microtransactions, and that's why all the subsequent versions are garbage, because they're positioned at trying to make you buy packs of things. Whereas the 2013 one, I don't know if they just hadn't worked that out or they hadn't planned it in, but absolutely not pushing the stuff that you can buy. And also buying it would then fast forward through the fun bit of the game, which is like the challenge of it. But the downsides of those sport games, the darker side of what I've called decompressing, is that there is a sort of numbness to it, that at some point you stop improving and enjoying the art of getting to know the game, and instead hit a groove of familiarity. Although it's relaxing in the moment, I do have moments of dread where I contemplate the amount of hours that I've spent achieving victories against imaginary opponents in games that no one will remember, trapped in, I suppose, in like a little Skinner box of my own making. And that is a deep dread, which isn't particularly relaxing. I could have learned languages, I could have read Anna Karenina, but instead I ground out another season in baseball land. Another aspect of relaxation that I thought of was the idea of just spending time in a pleasant place and that being inherently relaxing. And that was my first thought that came into my brain, and I was like, Stardew Valley, that's got to be my answer. And then you instantly said that in your answers moments after I'd had that thought. And obviously that's the right answer. Again, another game that is marvellous because its lack of microtransactions, and there's lots of sort of competitors to that type of game that are continuous and online that aren't relaxing because of the fact that they are forever trying to nudge you towards buying some gems which you can use to unlock more things. And the purity of its pay for the game, own the game, play the game nature it makes it absolutely stand out there. So because I can't use that game, I thought of something else, which is a game called Blockheads. And I think I might have played this around the Baseball Superstar 2013 period of my life, because I remember playing this on the tube on to and from work, and it was essentially Minecraft but 2D, an entirely unapologetic rip-off of the mechanics built into that game, but in a 2D flat environment, much like the game Terraria, which we've played together and I think is fantastic. But I'd argue Terraria isn't particularly relaxing because of the need to kill a bunch of enemies, and it's got a series of bosses that you're trying to defeat. There's some weird like necrotic blocks, that like fungal thing that is definitely not relaxing. But Blockheads I think existed before Terraria, and they were slowly adding to it and developing it as I was playing it, and it sort of lacked any of that like structure or thinking. And its smallness, I think, was useful. You could walk sideways, and eventually you'd if you walk to the right, eventually you'd end up back where you started. And it took a long time, but not forever. And I couldn't really tell you what the purpose of the game was. It was like a survival game, but there wasn't that much to survive from. And I felt that like that basic pull of just trying to make a ever increasingly elaborate house very, very pleasing. And so I think those games, survival games, I think are inherently relaxing if you're playing ones where there isn't incessant and creepy attacks. Games where you're essentially tasked with trying to build an aesthetically pleasing base. I think that's relaxing. And my friend Tom sent me a game recently that I had a look at, and it was one of those ones that made me want to buy a gaming PC, called Pleasant Glade, which, if that's not relaxing, I don't know what is. So take a gander at that. And I suppose that all led me to my final sort of thought around relaxation, which is very much linked to that idea of survival games, which is games that allow you to be nourished by the soft embrace of purpose. And I suppose what I mean by that is that the world is chaos and uncertainty. And the more that you learn about the world, the more layers there are. Each answer you get to something just creates more complexity and robs you of any form of certainty. And games are a type of simulation. And to create a simulation, you need to remove a bunch of the complexity of the world. And so that is very pleasing and satisfying and relaxing, I think, inherently. I know you were saying you get sort of caught up on trying to optimise and win, but there are games that just put you on a path, tell you what to do, reward you for doing the things that it's told you to do. And one of the ones that I was thinking around that, which uses some of the mechanics, I guess, that I was talking about in Baseball Superstars, of slowly and steadily improving a bunch of bars, which mean that you can do more things that let you feel more bars, is the game Punch Club, which I know we've both played. That's essentially a fighting game where you don't have to do any fighting. What you have to do instead is get your character to I think each week you're given a number of hours to spend doing different things, and you have to use that to go to the gym and do a job so you can buy food, so you can feed yourself, so you can have the strength to do more exercise or something like that. There's a simple game loop of choosing some tasks and having some bars fill up. And then at certain points, you can then go and do fights. And the fights are sort of not predetermined, but you essentially have to... it's like they automatically fight, and you're instead like spending cards or resources or something like that, aren't you? Not required to like button bash or anything. You're sort of watching the fights take place and instead trying to influence it through little decisions. And I think that, gentle progression, it's sort of impossible to play that game and not slowly improve over time. And, eventually your character's going to succeed. And the sort of plot line in it is quite tongue-in-cheek and exaggerated, vaguely sort of ganglandy, cop detective-y type thing. Like you're slowly investigating and uncovering a plot. So that all comes together nicely. I just found that whole process very relaxing and engaging in a way that's, fill some bars, get some victories, win some things, get the girl, buy some meat. It seemed to be a lot about eating meat. Is that right? Maybe you'll remember it better than me. I know you spoke about finding what should have been a relaxing game stressful in House Flipper. But as a counter question, I wondered whether there was a game that should be stressful that you actually find quite relaxing on some level.
Hello, all about the baseball. Lovely choices, buddy. And I must say, not actually what I would have predicted when I first thought about the answers you might come up with. And not to put you in any kind of particular box, but I think I envisaged more floaty, whimsical indie games with plinky-plonky music, which I think are also the kind of games that I think will relax me. But perhaps your answers have really taken me one step closer to the key to video game relaxation. Because, of course, the smart thing to do is to consider what games you seek out when you've been feeling stressed or anxious in your own life, and you're looking to decompress. And then when you did frame it like that, your choices made the most sense, really. Unfortunately, as well as not really knowing what relaxes me, I'm also not great at recognising when I'm stressed or need to decompress myself. And I think perhaps I've been looking for relaxation a bit more lately because of having a new baby and the chaos and exhaustion that comes with that. So it's more obvious to me at the moment that I do need to decompress. But the rest of the time, it doesn't feel so obvious. I don't think it was a big surprise that sports games would be one of your go-tos for relaxation. There's been a running theme of you turning to them and having them as a sort of constant that you'll always return to. And you are also a big fan of sports and competition in general. And as you said in previous episodes, you like to weave narrative into the games. You like to root for the underdog. And that's all kind of probably a part of the joy of those. Having said that, Baseball Superstars 2013 did feel a little left field, excuse the pun, as a mobile game from a sport that you're less interested in than others. But I downloaded it after your message. I've become addicted to it, which is the first for a while. I was doing really well at not being addicted to mobile games, but I'm right back in it. I can completely see why it's made your list. Also, though, caveat, I should say, you have since told me it was actually Baseball Stars 2012, but I can't imagine there are too many differences between the two. As you said, there's lots of weird and seemingly superfluous RPG and story elements to the game, but the main thing is just to go in and play a game of baseball and have 2 or 3 goes at hitting the ball, and the repetition, or as you put it, numbness, that kind of brings, is undeniably pleasing and is a form of switching off and decompressing. But I wondered that, instead of seeing it as being trapped in a type of numbness, maybe the way to reframe it is as a form of meditation. I've had my fair share of dalliances with meditation and mindfulness and all of that sort of stuff. And I always remember a video I watched years ago of this American man who moved to Thailand to become a Buddhist monk. And he ended up living in a hut on his own at the edge of a jungle somewhere. And his ethos was that anything can be meditation as long as it's repetitive and doesn't take up too much space in your brain. So he would go out and sweep his path and he would chant, sweeping, 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 as a sort of mantra, so that it became a meditative act. So maybe repetitive games are the same thing. And it's like batting, 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 running, running, running. And the only flaw with that is that Baseball Superstars is actually really hard. And I strike out more often than not, or I hit a foul ball, or get caught out, or something like that. Blockheads also felt like a very solid choice, and I completely agree that base building, and even survival actually in games, can be very relaxing. And the problem is that most of those sort of games are horror themed, or at least have a really high level of jeopardy in them. I think what would be lovely is a game where the jeopardy is your survival, but not involving constant attacks, terrifying enemies, and other sort of horrible challenges. I did look up the game you mentioned, Pleasant Glade, which I think turns out is actually called Tiny Glade, and it's already on my wish list, and it looks lovely and relaxing and beautiful. It seems to have lovely music and this really pleasing aesthetic. But you do basically just build nice buildings in a glade, and that is very relaxing. But there's no resource collection or food management or anything like that. It's just very creative. And of course, creative things can be relaxing, but sometimes being forced into creativity can be quite stressful, especially if you're not that way inclined. So I think for some people it might not scratch the itch in that way. For my research notes, the third game you chose was Punch Club, which I actually haven't played. I'm not familiar with it, though it looks really good. You did remember correctly that you don't actually do the fighting in the game, even though it is a fighting game. You just choose a set of skills and moves for your character during the fight. So it's like setting a fight strategy, and then you watch how your character fares in a sort of automatic bout. I watched a YouTube video where someone plays the first 100 days of the game, and I can confirm you do have to buy loads of meat from the shops and restaurants in that game. For the narrators of the various Civilization games, from what I can tell, 1, 2 and 3 didn't actually have a narrator. Leonard Nimoy was the narrator for Civilization 4, and he would say things like, "You have discovered pottery." That felt like a pretty solid Nimoy. Hold on, let me try one more time. "You have discovered pottery." No, I don't know. The older British actor William Morgan Shepherd was the narrator for Civilization 5 and its various expansions. And then big hitter comes in, Sean Bean narrated Civilization 6 and also did the voice acting for the intro and victory cutscenes. And Gwendolyn Christie, who famously plays Brienne of Tarth in the Game of Thrones TV series, is going to be the narrator in Civ 7, which is coming out in February 2025. And I will likely buy it when the price falls suitably low enough or it turns up in a Steam sale. Thinking about your counter question on games I played that are meant to be stressful but actually were quite relaxing, I kind of thought about games like Valheim or even The Forest, but only when played with friends. So much of the fear and jeopardy gets sucked out of them because you've got the kind of collaborative experience going on there. The Forest was actually still quite terrifying, even when I played with friends. There are bits where you have to go down into these caves that are like absolutely brutal. But the bits where you just build bases and collect resources and things like that were really lovely. And even more so in Valheim, where there are creepy bits and lots of enemies and the kind of thing that might put me off playing it on my own too much. But so much of it is just mining and farming and organising your base. So it does have a lot of that repetition we talked about, but with the added fun of just hanging out with your buds, which should always hopefully be relaxing, assuming you've got some good buds. It really does feel like this episode has genuinely taught me some helpful lessons about how I could go away and relax using video games. So I thought to conclude, I'd just wrap up a little list of the things that Nath and Rob need for a good relaxing game. So what I've got is a serious lack of jeopardy or anything scary, some form of monotony or repetition, familiarity or predictability, and not having too much choice or too many decisions to make. That feels like the makings of a perfect game. The autumn sale is on right now as I speak. Probably time to go get my wallet. I was having another think about games that were supposed to be stressful but that I found relaxing, and I considered Frostpunk on the PC, which is this city-building strategy game where it's set in an alternate history in the late 1800s, but a volcanic winter has ushered in a new ice age, so all of society has collapsed and lots of people have died, and you play a small community of survivors who have moved to the Arctic, of all places, where there are huge sources of coal, and then built massive generators around that coal, and the challenge of the game is building functioning cities around the generators and just keeping everyone alive. there's lots of things like managing societal turmoil and resources and buildings, and things gradually get colder and colder, and your people start by living in tents, and they've got makeshift hospitals and soup kitchens and stuff, and it all just looks freezing and awful. And the game, by all rights, should be stressful because you have to work really hard to keep everyone from freezing to death, and it keeps sending more and more challenges your way. But oh boy, does it look lovely and cozy near those big generators. One thing that really does relax me in real life is something that I call a warm-up, which harks back to when I was a kid and we had a very cold conservatory at the back of our house, and it had an old garden sofa in it and a tumble dryer. And my favourite thing was to sit in the cold conservatory in winter and have the warm air from the tumble dryer blow on me, also possibly damaging my lungs at the same time, but it was very cosy and lovely and warming. So, in spite of the efforts of the Frostpunk game developers, I just couldn't be stressed when I imagined being in this icy place, but stood next to a giant steampunk heat generator, basking in its warm, post-apocalyptic glow.
Memory complete. Uploading memory.
Thanks for listening to The Memory Game. If you would like to share a gaming memory with us, ask us a question or send us your thoughts, you can contact us at memorygamepod@gmail.com or on Instagram @memorygamepod.